Hi there. In this video, I just thought of creating, and I thought it would be helpful for you, especially for writing your paper, is to kind of put everything together that we've discussed so far. In this context, if you remember, the very first thing we discussed was we went over this handout. I called it "What We'll Do This Semester," and we said that there are our main puzzle that we are trying to solve is how we comprehend the text, and then you have individual pieces. Then you put together these pieces to solve the puzzle. The puzzle itself is how we comprehend written text. And we said that the the important pieces are sensation, perception, attention, memory. But there are some fundamental pieces that we said are really very important to understand before we begin to talk about these things. And we said of those, the most important ones are the language and the processing of language, where we talk about what language is and the levels of analyzing language, then theories of comprehension, and the comprehension process itself, which is basically comprehending at the word level and the sentence or clause level. Now that we have done everything, right, we covered all the things. The next part is to put together these pieces so we can solve the problem. I'm not going to solve the problem for you, but I'm going to give you some direction as to addressing this question or answering this puzzle. In doing so, we'll be going over several handouts. The same handouts that you have seen in the final paper description. The final paper has not only description but also handouts. So we'll go over those handouts to kind of give you some sense of what's going on. Also keep in mind that the discussion, weekly discussion questions are a part of helping you to actually write a better paper. Yep. Well, the first slide was about what I said we'll go over this semester, and this handout is about what we did this semester. Again, the puzzle remains the same, and you have to solve the puzzle by putting together all these individual pieces. But this is what we have learned throughout the semester by going through these individual pieces, fundamental pieces. So, if you remember, we started with understanding language, right? We define language um, as made of symbols and rules of combining symbols, and there are different kinds of symbols, starting with the smallest system or symbol of sound, the phoneme, for then the morphemes, some of which are words or morphemes combined to form words, then phrases, clauses, sentences, paragraphs, and so on and so forth. In the same topic, in the same puzzle piece, or in the fundamental piece, we also talked about the levels of processing language. We said there are 5 levels of processing language. The first 3 are the ones that linguists study language at, and the other 2 are the ones where psycholinguists study language in addition to the 3 levels. The 3 levels being the phonetics, which is study of the sound. Next one is what is that? Yeah, you're right. Syntax. The third one is, yes, lexical semantic. The last 2 are conceptual and, yes, belief level. Then we moved on to talking about comprehension theories. We said that um, when you, well, if these levels of processing language talk about what happens when you read a text, right? Processing the language itself. The comprehension theories kind of gives uh, an explanation as to how things happen. For instance, cognitive embodied cognition talks about how when you process language, the way you comprehend it is not just propositional extraction, but it has more to it, where you become a part of the situation that is unfolded when you're reading something. And this is kind of connected to the VSSP, if you remember, the Visual Spatial Sketchpad. Remember, you comprehend, or your cognition is for a purpose. The purpose is for you to interact and react with the objects in the environment. The second set of theories we looked at was the mental models, right? Or the event comprehension theories, which assume, like most of all these theories, assume that we extract propositions and we store propositions when we read something. And for you to do that, you need to analyze language at these levels, and you extract and store propositions, correct? Now, what mental model theory proposes is that these propositions that are extracted are put together in meaningful units. In other words, you kind of form these bubbles or mental models so that propositions or meaningful units that are related to one event are put together, and events or propositions related to a different event are put in different bubble, as if we are having or creating these different mental models. Then the next theory is the Kinch's text comprehension theory. Kinch and Van Dyke's text comprehension theory is about this. This is about how we process the language itself when you read, right? And this is about what else do you do other than extracting propositions. And this theory is about how do you group together these propositions. What Kinch's comprehension theory is addressing here is what is the nature of the product of the comprehension. So when you process something, you form propositions and store propositions, but how are they stored in your long-term memory? What is the format of that? Now, according to Kinch, we represent the meaning of whatever we read at three different levels: surface form, yes, text base, and situation model level at the same time. Like you can imagine, like this is like one, two, three, and the first one and second one are gone. The third one is the one we retain for a long time, which is a situation model. And the surface form retains both the meaning. I say here refer to both the meaning because it incorporates the meaning also. In other words, lexical semantic processing is also involved here. But more importantly, it also incorporates the syntax. Um, so, um, so the processing of the sentences at the phonetic, syntactic, and lexical semantic, all these three are included in the representation at the surface form level. You can think of text-based level as a subset of the surface form level. In other words, a part of it involves storing just the lexical semantic aspect of it, not the syntactic aspect of it, right? So that is a paraphrasing, the actual meaning, the actual propositional structure that is extracted and that is stored for a little longer than the surface level. Now, then you can think of a different set of representation where this is both a subset and a superset of the text-based representation, in the sense that if the text-based stores all the available propositions or paraphrases of the sentences that you've read, situation model only selects the most important propositions from this, and it gets stored at this level, the situation model level, the most important propositions or paraphrases. In addition to that, another important aspect of the situation model is that it generates and stores, actually not generates, it stores the inferences that you'll generate when reading a text, especially the inferences that you generate when you're processing language at the conceptual and belief levels. So what does it all mean? Well, when you read something, right, you understand it. When you understand something, you store the understanding of it in the form of a representation. That representation is at three different levels or three different kinds at the same time. One is the surface form, which has the representation of the exact wording and meaning. Text based, which has only the representation of the meaning. And the last one is the situation model, which has a representation of the most important meaningful events plus the inferences. This is lost immediately, this is lost after some time, but this is what is retained for a longer time. Okay, now then we moved on to kind of talked about it, but we did not have like a unit to talk about it, but the comprehension process. Now, when we say comprehension process, you can divide comprehension process into processing at the word level and processing at the clause/sentence level. Now, you can have a simple sentence. In that case, you only have one clause. But if you have a complex sentence, then you have two independent clauses or one independent, one subordinate clause, and things like those. Again, theoretically, it's a clausal level, but I'm going to use clause and sentence synonymously here. Well, what happens at the word level and what happens at the sentence level? Well, what happens at the word level? That's right. You phonetically process the individual printed letters, like you sense the information. And I'm so happy you guys actually talked about in the discussions. That's really impressive. So you talk about how the letters, for instance, when you read this, the individual printed letters are sensed, right? And the individual sounds of these letters are perceived, and the combination of sounds of these letters are perceived as words. So the phonetic processing leads to word identification. Phonetic processing leads to word identification. That's what happens at the word level. What happens at the class level is the rest of these. In other words, at each word, you identify a word as a word without referring to its meaning, without looking at its concept, and without anything else. You just identify each word as a word. Then these words that are identified, right, they are stored in the short-term memory. And once you get to the end of the sentence or clause, right, all these words that are identified would then go through the process of syntactic processing, lexical semantic processing, conceptual processing, and belief level processing. In other words, you identify the propositional structure of each of the individual words, what parts of speech that the word belongs to, right? And what else? Syntax, whether it's a subject, verb, object, right? And also the Chomsky's uh, the phrasal structure of the words put together. Once you do that, then you process the lexical semantic nature of it. What it means is that each and word, every word has carry meaning, right? And that's the textbook meaning, or sorry, the dictionary meaning, and that would be lexical. But each and every word also plays a role in terms of the semantic role, right? Whether it's an actor, action, verb, place, things like those. That is identified as well. Then then the complete meaning of it, of the sentence put together, comes when you also process the conceptual and belief levels. Conceptual level is about the involving or incorporating the um, the conceptual definition of the words as opposed to the lexical definition. Conceptual definition involves semantic memory one. Remember, semantic memory one, where you have the they in the sentence. Mary and John saw mountains when they were flying to California. The they refers to Mary and John, but not mountains, because mountains don't fly. But the definition of mountains doesn't say it flies, so it's not a part of the lexical processing. But you make this inference that the they belong to Mary and John because of the conceptual knowledge you have. Semantic memory one, you have about the word mountain, the concept mountain. That will help you make an inference that the they here refers to Mary and John, and that Mary and John are actually flying. You may also make an inference that, well, they can fly because humans can fly. Conceptual knowledge again, that they are probably in an airplane, which again is an inference that was not directly stated in the sentence. So those kind of inferences are made, and those inferences are incorporated in um, the representation at the situation bound level. Then we also talked about, I know the name itself, it says belief level, but it's not directly related to the belief, but it is related to the context in which you're reading a sentence, which also involves the beliefs you have about the author. So if I wasn't clear when I was talking about it in the actual video, just to give you a sense, a belief here refers to the beliefs that you have as a reader about the author and why, and then the purpose of writing, and the why you think is the author writing this. But in a general sense, what it is basically the context in which it is written. If it is written in the context of a detective story, it may seem or mean different. If it's written in the form of, in the context of uh, let's say a fiction story, that could mean something, so the context in which it's written, the genre it belongs to, may also act as a context. So all these things are incorporated, and that processing takes place at the clause level. I want you to really understand that. So only when you have come to the end of the clausal level will you actually have these three representations. Do you see the understanding here now? So, so, um, so at the word level, you're just doing phonetic processing, identifying words, correct? Now, when you go to the class level, that's when you can incorporate other models. First of all, you extract and store propositions. These propositions are stored in a way that you get representations at three different levels, right? Then these representations are grouped according to the meaning and according to how related these propositions are. Then, along with the propositions, you also activate your sensory motor system so that you are a part of the system, so that you can interact and act. So if you see, all these theories are applicable especially to the processing at the clausal level. Okay, so those are the important things I wanted to talk about now. I'll pause the video. It's been long, 13 or 14 minutes. But in the second part of the video, I'll talk about the other pieces. We talked about the fundamental pieces. Let's talk about the basic pieces now. Okay, so let's talk about the basic pieces now. The basic pieces include the sensation, attention, perception, and memory. And these pieces, and we've talked about these pieces in general, but I'm going to slightly shift the gears and kind of pay attention to, especially in the context of reading a text, because eventually, not eventually, pretty soon you're going to submit your paper by solving this puzzle. Okay, so what is sensation? Well, we said sensation is, let us use this sentence as an example. This is what we did this semester. Okay, now sensation is capturing these printed letters, right? As you know, our eyes capture information, especially visual information, in fixations and saccades, right? You fixate, and the information is captured, right? Then you fixate, information is captured, and at each fixation, usually the fixations are at the levels of words, um, but eventually when you once you get used to reading, it may become a chunk. In other words, you can read in phrases if you're a fast reader. So again, you just want to give an idea. So let's go to the basic and say sensation happens at each word. You capture the letters, right? Now what comes after sensation? Attention, right? But given that you're reading at the reading, not the general vision, right? So you're already attending to the information. So attention becomes a part of the sensation. In fact, if you remember, we talked about um, fixation to fixation. There is a saccade, and we said what triggers saccade is this expectation called spotlight attention, which is a part of the attention. Does it make sense? So sensation, before you can capture information, you are incorporating attention in it. And I really like the way you most some of you guys actually talked about this stuff when you were summarizing the two articles in one of those I think fourth week of discussion forum. So that's cool. Okay, so you capture information. Like, for how long is this information held in your sensory memory? In other words, in your eyes, in your retina. Well, if you remember, it is, you learned that, yes, it's right, 250 milliseconds, right? And this 250 milliseconds is what is used to perceive whatever is captured in each word. So 250 milliseconds, capture, perceive, and you identify this as a word, and this identified word is stored in your last short-term memory, right? Next word, 250 milliseconds, it is stored, and during this 250 milliseconds, your brain perceives it, identified as a word, and where it perceives is in the short-term memory, so it is stored in the short-term memory. So you do this process, a cyclical process of identifying each word as a word without its meaning or anything. Then all these identified words are identified in short-term memory, and that's where the information is held, right? And again, as you know, sensory memory only holds information for 250 milliseconds, but short-term memory holds information for how long? Yeah, 15 to 30 seconds. So you can actually read and store multiple sentences at the same time, and carry on to the next set of sentences. I hope you're kind of visualizing what I'm saying here. Okay, so sensation, right, happens at the word level, right? Perception also happens at the word level, and perception is basically identifying each word as a word in this case. Again, if you remember, if you connect this to the phonetic processing, it's just related to the phonetic processing, correct? And identifying word is key to any of these levels of representation, because without identifying the words as words, you won't be able to actually develop propositions, because you need propositions, and for that you have to process language at the other levels. Okay, so we talked about sensation. How much of the information, remember there's another question we answered, how much of information is captured by sense organs, and when we talked about different experiments of Sperling's whole report, partial report, eventually we concluded that your eyes capture 76% of the information out there. Well, this may not apply to reading, because each fixation is fixated on a single word. It's like 100% of the information, because your focus is so narrow that everything that is focused on is what is captured. So it's slightly different. It's like most of the information. The other information that's not captured would be the other sentences surrounding it, because your focus is very narrow at this point. Anyways, once the information is sensed, it is perceived, identified as word, and it's sent to the short-term memory. Correct? And that short-term memory, right? Because short-term memory is one of the attentional systems. Correct? Okay. Now, what is attention? We said that attention is both a mental process and also a resource, and we talked about two attentional systems, system 1 and system 2, or input system or control system. Input attentional system, again, we looked at three basic ones: the alertness, which is the mental state of being alert. Then orienting reflex is this reflexive action to a sudden stimulus, or a sudden change in the stimulus. Then we talked about the third one, which is basically spotlight attention. Again, this is the same spotlight attention that is triggering a saccade to help you move from one word to another. So that is the spotlight attention, right? Then we talked about the controlled aspect of the attention. This is the input, which is more automatic kind of, and controlled is more conscious, and more controlled. And we talked about the selective slash divided attentional aspect of it. And in the divided aspect of attention, we said divided attention is when you're trying to be aware of more than one thing at the same time, which you cannot do. That's why one activity always suffers. You can only shift between activities. We also talked about selective attention, where you're selectively attending to one and deselecting the other information. And we talked about several theories, two important theories: the early selection theory and late selection theory. The early selection theory assumes that you make the selection of what you want to attend to very early on, by only after processing the physical features of it. Broadbent's theory is one example of the early selection theories. Then we looked at the late selection theory, which is one example we looked at was Treisman's late selection theory, where you actually process information beyond physical features till you know the meaning of what you're reading, or what you're perceiving. Then may you make a decision, right? Then you that's how you make a selection. So we talked about early and late selection theories. Then we also talked about attention as a resource. We said attention is not only a mental process, it is also a resource. And as a resource, we talked about four attentional ideas, right? There is more in the sensory memory than you can perceive. Attentional resources are limited and different. Um, there is I've lacking on the word here. Task variability. Different tasks require different amount of attentional resources. And the last idea was that practice is key to make difficult tasks easier by moving them from being more complex, resource demanding, to less resource demanding stuff. Okay. The third aspect of the controlled attention was the SAS, right? The same SAS that we've been referring to here when we say that we identify a word in short-term memory, right? That's what SAS is, right? So all these identified words are identified in the short-term memory or working memory. right? SAS refers to both short-term and working memory. It's basically the same thing. One is a simpler conception, the other one is a more complex conception. In short-term memory, we talked about how much information it can hold for how long and how we can actually get over that. In the working memory, it's a more complex conception of the same SAS, and we said that they're different. It's a multi-component system. It has multi-components: the central executive, the episodic memory, the visual spatial sketch, episodic buffer, sorry, visual spatial sketchpad, and phonological loop. And we talked about different phenomena related to these. We also talked about the phonological loop having two substructures: the phonological store and the articulatory process. We talked about the processes related to phonological sorry, the process, the phenomena related to each of those structures. We also talked about the phenomena related to visual spatial sketchpad. And we said that the visual spatial sketchpad is embodied in the sense that we process information in the visual spatial sketchpad uh, um, in a in real time with the purpose to react and interact, right? Is related to this embodied cognition. And we looked at the such phenomena, visual spatial sketchpad related phenomena, like mental rotation, representational momentum, boundary effect. Then we also talked about the episodic buffer. We said that the latest component that was added by Badley and H to their original three structure model. And then we said episodic memory, it integrates information from multiple components and also from the working memory, and gives you the complete experience of an event by putting together the sound, the voice, the picture, and everything else you're experiencing at any given point of time. So, so that's about what we did this semester. And again, there's a lot we did this semester, because again, we could talk about individual things in detail, but uh, um, I'm going to just give you a bigger picture as opposed to going in detail. Okay, now the last piece we said was memory. When we say short-term memory, but short-term memory is more than a memory, right? That's why we put that in the attention. So memory, specifically, we are referring to long-term memory. Well, long-term memory is both a mental process, and any memory system is both a mental process and a storage system, right? So is long-term memory. Then we said that we also talked about the classification of long-term memory, if you remember, the declarative long-term memory and non-declarative long memory. In the declarative long-term memory, and the non-declarative is the procedural part, the memory for how, and the declarative memory is about memory for what. And we said this, based on the content, is further divided into episodic memory and, that's right, semantic memory. Episodic memories are memories for personal experiences. Semantic memories are memories for general knowledge, right? And the general knowledge that you generate is based on your experiences over time. If these are about events or objects or ideas, then semantic memory 1. I apologize, it says 1b. It's semantic memory 1. Okay, and if these patterns that you've identified and formed make it a part of your general knowledge, these situational concepts would be a part of your semantic memory 2. Again, I apologize, it says 1, it's 2. So semantic memory 1, semantic memory 2. So the general knowledge you have gained is not coming from one sitting, one reading, one episode. It's coming from multiple exposure to experiences related to either objects or ideas that you extract. Then that becomes a part of your semantic memory 1, conceptual knowledge. Or about the situations that you experience, then you have concepts for situations, then that becomes a part of your semantic memory 2, which is a situational knowledge. And we talked about both, and we also talked about semantic memory, situational knowledge, and we said that both situation knowledge um, and and the semantic memory, both are semantic knowledge or conceptual knowledge, both are a set of sorry, it's a network of concepts. If the concepts are about objects and ideas, it's semantic memory 1. If these concepts are about situations, then it's semantic memory 2. And these concepts specific to situational knowledge are called, yes, you're right, schemata and scripts. Okay, and we said that semantic memory structurally is made of concepts and propositions, because a proposition is two concepts in one pathway. Okay, and we also talk about schemas, scripts, and concepts, and concept activation, the process involving is concept activation, spread of activation, search intersection, right? These things apply to both semantic memory 1 and 2. Well, I hope this quick review helped you. Um, and I'll go over the other three handouts we have for this particular part, writing the paper. I hope this helps you writing the paper. Thank you very much. Stay tuned. Okay, so in this next two slides, what we basically will try to do is talk about the comprehension processes in a little bit more detail. First, we'll talk about the processes at the word level, and then in the following slide, we'll talk about in the class level. So in this slide, we'll talk about the word level, and the next slide, we'll talk about it at the class level. Now, um, just this is more of a review and putting things together. And again, we did this most of it in the previous slide when I gave a brief review of all the topics, but I'm going to do it again. Okay, so these columns here, right? This column represents the processing of language at 5 levels, and we'll talk about how it is related to word level processing and how it is related to the class level processing. At the class level processing, there is an additional thing that we'll talk about, which we already did. It's kind of a review again. I think in the first week of this semester we did talk about that, but anyways, we'll do it again. Okay, so what happens at the word level? Well, you already know that, right? First, it goes through a mental process of number one. What is it? Captures printed letters, sensation, right? So you capture the printed letters, that's sensation. Then second part is you identify the printed letters and their sounds, right? And then so it becomes perception of letters and their sounds. The third thing we do is identify the combinations of these sounds as words. So again, perception of words. So sensation of printed letters, perception, in other words, identification of individual letters and their sounds, and perception of the combination of the individual letters and their sounds as word. So that's exactly what happens at the word level, right? And what happens at the class level are the remaining things. Again, it's a reiteration. I just wanted to give you um, re-emphasize the importance of this. So at the class level, what exactly happens at the class level? Well, the other processes, right? The syntactic processing, lexical semantic processing, the conceptual processing, and the belief level processing. So we'll talk more about the clausal or clause or sentence level in the next slide. So at the clause level, we said that we process language at the remaining four levels of Miller's four levels of processing language, which include the syntactic processing, lexical semantic processing, the conceptual processing, and the belief level processing. In addition to that, as a result of this processing, we kind of extract and create propositions, and we have some theories that talk about how we might do it. Again, this hypothetical, it's an assumption that this is how we might be doing it. So how do we extract propositions from the text? Again, if it is related to our first few weeks of lectures, and we said that we list all relations, correct? Then we create propositions from these relations. Remember the relations? Relations are the verbs and adjectives in a sentence. So for a sentence like the genius Thomas Alva Edison discovered electric bulb, you would take discovered, genius, electric as the relations. So you list all the relations, then you create propositions for each relations, right? So you would say Thomas Alva Edison um, was genius was one proposition, then the bulb was electric was another one, and that Edison discovered bulb is another. So you have three propositions. Then you combine these three propositions to form a complex proposition, and that is how you store the extracted meaning. Now, now when you have these, this is from one sentence, right, or one complex sentence. Now, when you read several such things, then you have a network of propositions that you have extracted. Now, the different theories about how or what you might do with these propositions. So these theories include embodied cognition, mental models, and Kinsh's representation, text of comprehension theory. According to embodied cognition, it's not just the propositions that you extract and represent, but you also activate and simulate the somatosensory and motor areas so that you are kind of doing it for a purpose of interacting with the environment. Then mental models assumes or proposes that these propositions are grouped together based on how connected, related these propositions are in terms of their content, all related to one event, one time, one character, are put together to form one mental model, and so on and so forth. Then the Kinshas theory talks about how what the product is eventually of the comprehension. Well, when you comprehend a sentence or eventually the paragraph of the text, there are three levels of representation at each time you develop the surface level, the surface form level, the text space level, and the situation modeling. And we extensively discussed this earlier. Now, what happens as a result now is that you store these representations in your long-term memory, and it becomes a part of both episodic long-term memory and semantic long-term memory. This is something you need to keep in mind because they both have the same propositional structure to it. Again, I thought it would be helpful to actually go over all the handouts that were posted in the final paper section. So one of the handouts that were posted was this, which kind of emphasizes what exactly happens, the result of the five levels of processing, right? And in the next slide talks about how this would be related to the three levels of representing knowledge. So Miller's five levels and the Kinchin Van Dyke's three levels of processing. Now, as you can see, the first level is the phonetic processing, which is processing language at the sound level, which leads to, as we have seen, word identification, correct? And the word identification then moves on to, once all the words are identified, then you have the other uh, processes kicking in. The first one is syntactic processing, which leads to the kind of creating a phrasal structure, then subject, verb, object, nature of the words, and also the parts of speech the verb plays in a given sentence. Now, this syntactic structure will give clues to the lexical and semantic aspects of each word. Right? Remember, all these things are happening at the clause level. This as just identifying word happens at the word level. So lexical semantic leads to knowing the word's meaning, the word's lexical meaning, and the semantic processing leads to understanding or activating the word's semantic case role, right? Or the thematic case role, or the case role. So the actor, action, recipient, then you have agent, location and time. Um, Now, these three are the linguistic levels of analyzing language. The other two are the additional levels that psycholinguists study at. So these are the psycholinguistic levels, which includes conceptual and belief level. And we also talked about how conceptual level processing leads to generating inferences. Exactly, inferences related to conceptual knowledge, like they're referring to Mary and John because mountains can fly, or inferring that they're flying in an airplane because humans can't fly. So these inferences that you draw from the conceptual knowledge, the semantic memory one. The belief level leads to also generating inferences based on the context in which you're reading a text, including the beliefs you have about the writer. Um, so in the next slide, we'll see how these five levels are related to Kinsh's three levels of representing meaning. Well, in this slide, we'll talk about how the Miller's five levels of analyzing language are related to Kinsh's three levels of representing meaning. Well, this is one of the weekly discussions, and it's really impressive how you make this connection. Kudos, good job. Now here, if you can see, I try to kind of give you a color coding coded clue. I don't know if you um, were able to actually identify that. You can see these are red color, and the surface level is coded red, and the second one is the text base, it's coded in green, the lexical semantic is coded in green, and the um, situation model is coded blue, and you can see these are the conceptual and belief levels that are coded in blue, kind of giving some clues about how this might be related. And you did a great job, you guys, in the weekly discussions. Now, at surface level, as you know, it incorporates the syntactic structure, right? And also the meaning. So it's not exactly just red, right? But red is unique to it. It identifies words and has a syntactic structure, but syntactic level, surface level also has lexical and semantic aspect to it. So I just wanted to you to understand that the surface level has both as phonetic information, syntactic information, and lexical semantic. So the result of these three is surface level. So surface level is related to these three, whereas the text-based level is mostly related to the lexical semantic, right? Because it has just the meanings, not the exact word. Again, phonetic is required. It's a basic stuff, right? Then the situation model, right? It has some of the lexical semantic. Remember, the most important paraphrases are important um, um, most important events are stored as a paraphrases, as a propositions. Then most importantly, the conceptual and belief levels are the important part. So it's not just blue inferences, but some parts of green also there. So I want you to understand, red plus a little bit of green, green is little bit green is mostly green, but blue is a little bit of green and also blue. So again, this is something we discussed. We kept discussing this over and over again. So I hope it kind of helps you at this point. These are the handouts I wanted to review, which I thought would help you with your paper. Please shoot me an email if you need any help. As I said, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much. Have fun. Um, have fun learning.